Greetings, everyone. This is David Gillig, Senior Consultant and Principal with Marts&Lundy, and I'm delighted to welcome you to our webinar today to discuss the continuing rise in giving to health and how you can keep pace and steadily grow your own giving programs. This is really a result of the 2018 Giving USA annual report, which covered philanthropy results in 2017, and you'll hear and see that we'll reference that report several times as we go through today. A couple of housekeeping notes. To avoid background noises and other issues that can happen with your audio devices, each attendee is in listen-only mode, but we do want your questions and comments, so please at any time send us a message using the question box, which you'll find in a control bar on the right side of your screen. Depending on where we are in the presentation, I'll either have our presenters pause so that I can share your question or comment with them, or I will do so at the end of the program. We've allowed for about 10 minutes for questions after the main discussion. I'm delighted to introduce two esteemed colleagues who are joining me and leading our conversation today. Mark Kimball, a Senior Consultant, and Frank Interlicchia, Senior Consultant and Principal. Mark and Frank have many years experience as Senior and Chief Development Officers at leading academic medical centers, children's hospitals, and community health systems. To find out more about their backgrounds, please visit our website at www.martsandlundy.com. I'll be inviting each to share thoughts about important trends and key takeaways today, and we'll do our best again to reserve 10 minutes or so at the end of the webinar to answer your questions. Today's webinar will be recorded, and we'll send you a link of the recording at the end of this week. Because several of our slides are from the 2018 Giving USA annual report, we're unable to provide you with an electronic copy of the PowerPoint. So with all that as background, let's go ahead and start. I'm going to ask Mark to start us off by describing some key trends that he's seen in the 2018 Giving USA report. Mark.
Thank you, David, and greetings from Austin, Texas, where it was 106 degrees yesterday, but not quite that today, but it's all a dry heat, as we say down here in the Southwest. So, folks, we're going to be reminded to start with that our 27 contributions totaled $410.02 billion, surpassing $400 billion for the first time ever. You all, by the way, know who have seen a hard copy of the Giving USA book, that it's relatively thick. So our goal today is to change that, from about a 2-pound doorstop and give the contents of that some relevance, at least as far as giving to health is concerned. So the $400 billion, passing that for the first time, it's a great soundbite, and it's a nice number. It's good to know that giving increased about 5.2% more than in 2016. And as we wade into the details and some of the trends, we want to tell a little bit more of the story. And fortunately, for the most part, the news is good. Not surprisingly, individuals continue to be the largest source of giving. Important to note that giving as a percentage of our gross national, or I should say gross domestic product, GDP, remains at just over 2%. And we'll talk about that a little further in. Let's look, though, at total giving over the past 40 years. So this takes us back to 1977. And giving has increased in current dollars every year since 1977, with the exception of 3 years that saw declines, 1987, 2008, and 2009. And each of those years, as I think most of us recall, were associated with a poor economy, a bear stock market, something that was affecting people's confidence. 2009 was the last year of the Great Recession, and for the years 2009 to 2017, the total growth in inflation-adjusted giving is 30.6%. So that's what we have. Enjoyed since the Great Recession, and points to the resiliency that we've seen across every source and recipient category, especially in the last couple of years. So during those past 2 years, the factors that correlate with giving are all positive, and these green lights include the S&P growth, low unemployment, approximately a 3% increase in personal discretionary income, and increases in personal and family consumption. All those have been positive trends in the past few years, and we would anticipate that in most of those cases that will exist in the upcoming year as well. Moving to giving by type in 2017, we'll see that religious organizations held their traditional dominant spot. 31% is the largest piece of that pie that you see there. Education at number 2 with 14% of the total. And then over there on the left is health. The health sector is the 5th largest share at 9% of the total, amounting to $38.27 billion. Important to note here that this is not a perfect data science, because there are some health dollars given to health, especially at academic medical centers, that are part of the education pie. Not possible to tell how much, but we believe that most of what we're most concerned with is contained in the health section of the pie, where in fact many of those universities do report it. So it's a little hard to tell sometimes. We should know that every recipient category is up in 2017, except for the international affairs category. Now, as far as giving by source is concerned, we move from the recipient to the source here. You can see that individuals comprise 70% of total giving in 2017. They are the largest part of that pie. Foundations amounted to 16% of all gifts, and these foundations are independent foundations, community foundations, and operating foundations. Family foundations, by the way, are included within that independent foundation subsector. You'll also see the other categories there of bequests, foundations, and corporations. And it's interesting to note that if you combine individuals, bequests, and family foundations, that amounts to 86% of total giving in 2017. And so again, individuals in one form or the other make up the best sources of funds, as they have since this study began. We should also mention that of that 86% that I said, gifts of 100 million or more were significant in 2017. There were 23 of them totaling $314 million. 23 of them totaling $314 million, and that compares to 2016, when there were 17 such gifts totaling $220 million. So almost a $100 million increase there. There is some concerning news among all the good, and that is that donor retention remains flat at about 45% of donors retained by recipient organizations, and that's 45% in both 2016 and 2017. And new donors to all the organizations in Giving USA were only up by 0.07%. And this is something that has been ongoing again for the last several years. Now, let's look quickly at the giving by source and how that has changed year over year. So you take a look here and you see that this chart shows horizontal bars, one for 2015-16 and another bar for 2016-17. The percentage for each horizontal bar are year over year percentage changes for those years, and the total percentage change over 2 years, so that would be from 2015 to 2017, is shown at the far right. So for the first set of bars, that's the one that is named total. For the first set of bars, you'll see there's a 5.2% increase for 2016-2017 overall, and the comparable increase for 15-16 was 3.6%. So for time's sake, by the way, we're just working in current dollars here. If you want an economist view and inflation-adjusted numbers, then again, you can go back and look at the full report, but you'll see similar kinds of, while they would be obviously discounted based on inflation, you would see similar kinds of increases and changes between years. At the far right, the 2-year change in total charitable giving between 15 and 17 is 9% in current dollars. And you can read the rest of the bars, but you can see that every source was up this past year, with the exception of foundations, which was down year over year, or I should say report over report. Now, looking at the changes in giving by recipient, that we have the same kind of horizontal bars there that show the years, and you can scan those, but look specifically at the 5th category from the top, and that is us in the health sector. So giving to health realized an increase of 4.2% in current dollars between 2015 and 16, and grew 7.3% between 2016 and 17. And then, of course, the number 11.9% represents the total giving between, or the total percentage change between 2015 and 2017. So let's look at the two sources that made up the greatest giving to health. And this goes back to my comments earlier about family foundations, individuals. Giving by individuals, estimated charitable giving by individuals and households was $286.65 billion in 2017, an increase of 5.2%. Very coincidental, the total giving increase for the year was 5.2%, but also was giving by households and as individuals. And the total amount estimated by giving by individuals in 2017, this includes both itemized and non-itemized charitable deductions, and these are these are gifts of cash and securities and property. And the trend that you see there in giving individuals is, if you look at it from 2012 to 2017, you'll see that that trend is more gentle than what we see in the next slide for foundations, where if you look from 2012 to 2017, at glance there, you can see a much steeper kind of trajectory. So this is grant making by independent community and operating foundations. This grant making increased in 2017 by 6% to an estimated $66.9 billion. So very much a trend here, very much we believe due to wealthy individuals transferring funds to family foundations, and also the growth among community foundations, which are again accepting dollars from individuals who want to place that money there and then advise upon its use. Specifically, so you'll know, independent foundations increased by 4.9% in that year, operating foundations 6.2%, and then the community foundations increased by 11% from 2016 to 2017. And here, this is, I think, very telling. Giving by family foundations is estimated to be 47.4% of total foundation giving in 2017. So nearly half of all the money that is flowing from foundations is attributed to family foundations. So let's look specifically at the healthcare sector. So you'll see here that the contributions to the health sector comprise 9% of all donations. Saw that in pie chart earlier. Giving to these health organizations grew 7.3% in 2017, totaling $38.27 billion. Health organizations, by the way, when they talk about health organizations, are mostly hospitals and clinics. It is not the totality of everything within the health category, because medical research, as a big example, is also in there. But health organizations specifically grew by a healthy 7.3%. And in 2017, the contributions to health totaled the highest. They totaled the highest value recorded to date, both in current dollars and in inflation-adjusted dollars. Compared with charitable organizations of all types, the greater proportion of health organizations surveyed by the Nonprofit Research Collaborative reported increases in giving in 2017 compared to 2016. So this, again, health organizations are surpassing, other kinds of places that people may choose to give their funds. And moreover, I think, is to know that giving to health increased for the 6th consecutive year at an annualized rate of 7.9%. That puts a real dollar number on what we're talking about here. Online giving also increased. Blackbaud produces an index on that each year. It grew 11.5% in 2017 over 16. The biggest large gifts, including those at the $100 million category, went to support medical research, medical centers, hospitals, and health charities in 2017. And then finally, on this slide, I would note that, not related to anything that's on the slide, but as background, individuals listed in the Chronicle of Philanthropy's top 50 most generous donors prioritized health organizations in 2017 over every other kind of organization that they might have chosen to give to. And then the next slide is the last one, and just provides an overview of giving by type of recipient. So in this case, where you see the vertical bars, those represent 5-year increments, starting again in 77, 78. And during that time, you can see that religious organizations have been in steady decline, when it was once as high as 58%, and now is down to 32% of the total. Education sectors made small gains in that 40-year period, going from 11% low to a 14% high. Should note that this past year, giving to education has been the strongest that it's been within the last 5-year period. The share of total giving to human services stands at 12% for the 5-year period beginning in 2013. This subsector, it dropped to single-digit levels, but then that was in the late 80s, early 90s, but it rose again, and now is captured as much as 13% of the total. And then foundations, of course, being the other area of recipient that have really increased, where we're talking 5 and 12% of total contributions over the last 40 years. So that has increased significantly. And then our own health subsector, that has ranged over that period of time from 6 to 10%, though you can tell we've held, I should say, 6 to 9%, and 9% most recently. We've held pretty steady at 8 or 9% over the last 15 years. So with that, David.
Well, thank you, Mark. I'd like to turn now to some ideas around what all this means as far as what you put into practice and what you can do to really amplify your fundraising program. I'd start with asking Frank to talk a little bit about what this means for what the report can shed some light on regarding case for support in health.
Thank you very much, David, and welcome to everyone from Rochester, New York, where it's only 85 degrees, but we have a lot of humidity that you don't have in Austin. So we're pretty tough up here too. So in looking at case for support as it relates to the Giving USA study, I'd like to say a few things first, generally about case for support in healthcare. And we all understand, looking at the list of attendees on today's webinar, this varies dramatically depending on the type of institution you are, from community hospitals to academic medical centers to scientific research institutions. And yet the case for all of us continues to be at the very core of what we do, whether we're doing a comprehensive campaign or simply an annual appeal. Articulating the institution's vision, and most importantly, the impact that we have on our communities, on the nation, and on the world. Those outcomes are what resonate the most with donors. And I know that David and Mark have had similar experiences, but you know, the more we talk with institutions about their fundraising cases, the more they're saying that their donors say they want to help solve problems. So I think that in thinking about the trends in healthcare giving and in society in general, what problems are your institution addressing? How do those resonate with donors? A little plug too for internal politics with building your cases for support, to think about that the very exercise of building your case for support is a way to bring institutional planning into alignment with fundraising, which doesn't happen quite as often as one would think or hope that it does. So more specifically, in looking at trends that we saw in the Giving USA report, you know, one interesting example was that it was noted that more funds have been going in the last few years to areas that were previously less recognized and less supported, areas like addiction and mental health. So, you know, it has been interesting to note that changes in policy, current issues of national importance do sway philanthropy. So that's one thing to bear in mind. Another example that I found very interesting was that funding for scientific and biomedical research also tended to be something people were paying more attention to, and you see especially some very large gifts made to in recent years. Giving to research is a longer-term endeavor in terms of results, you know, but as you look at popular press, there's an increasing awareness of the potential impact on health, genome sequencing, immunotherapy. I don't know if it's a proper gauge, but when issues hit the cover of Time magazine, usually it's in the popular consciousness. And so we've seen donor activity follow that path. Excuse me. And so I think it's the cautionary note would be that this isn't sad fundraising. No, you're not. Your institutions aren't implementing programs that chase popular trends, but it really is a way to take a look at pressing issues and can the articulation of your mission be adapted to those issues. The study also reflected that there's a shift in giving to reflect changes in social norms too, and that there's an impact of donors who are younger and more diverse. And that's a general trend, not just for healthcare donors, but certainly something that impacts healthcare. I think healthcare donors and general donors move along the same path in that respect. You know, so, you know, increasing a desire, the donor's desire to see impact, be more creative in approaches, and how care programs are designed. Now, I know as fundraising professionals, we don't design the programs for our institutions, but to look for programs that are being especially responsive to current and growing needs, there are development opportunities there. And the study even suggests that, as hospitals and healthcare systems are preparing for a possible surge in uncompensated care due to policy changes and shifts, is there a philanthropic case to be made here? Now, I don't have an answer for that, but I think that is a question, depending on your institution and your donor base, that is worth asking. So I think if I were to give you a notion or two to carry away in terms of case for support, it would certainly be to include current and evolving programs that resonate with emerging issues. There's no doubt that that's a place where you can take advantage of the current trends. And secondly, as we're hearing from donors, focus intently on your mission and on the impact of that mission. There is a tendency, when there's a lot of attention to changes in tax law, to worry about how that will affect donors broadly. But it's not the most important reason people give, and studies have reinforced that many times over the years. So focus on mission, focus on impact. And I think that's all I have to say at the moment on case.
Thank you, Frank. Now we got to move toward campaigns and what the report is telling us about how we might plan for campaigns. Mark? Mark, are you with us? You might be on mute, sir.
I was on mute. Thank you. I'm back.
Okay.
All right. So interestingly, the Giving USA report, most of the pages that they devote to campaigns are focused on those campaigns at the $1 billion level, the big campaigns. And of course, what we all know, and in fact, what's true across most recipient organizations, is that nobody is running, campaigns of that magnitude. And in fact, what we would say is that, and I'm building on what Frank has talked about in the case for support, is we think that something that is going to be smaller, focused, more specialized, is going to be more attractive to donors. So while we would say that campaigns remain the single best model for organizing and executing a fundraising kind of initiative, they're not your father's comprehensive campaign. And what we as professionals have to do is to create those compelling and relevant gift opportunities for the kind of current or evolving programs that are resonating, especially with our donors, but also with the public. The areas around mental health and addiction, Frank mentioned, as well as the underserved population. Those are two areas where most of our health organizations, have something to say, something to do in those spaces. And if not there, then still looking at disease specific kinds of programs where grateful patients or people who care and have been affected by those things can really become involved. The main point beyond organizing in the case then would be to consider how all of this gets promoted, because it is so crowded out there with competing, not just competing issues out of the health sector, but with so many others who are trying to raise money, spending time on truly integrating your communications and your marketing so that you get, a very robust and attractive message is really critical. And, keep repeating that so that you are, attracting donors who want to be a part of your mission and to make an impact. And they are seeing that the institution is so committed that they're willing to put the resources behind those kind of communications. So a smaller scope campaign with a sharp case focus, being able to pull in high-level volunteers and big donors who see this as a better fit for their philanthropic objectives, maybe even consider a shorter period of time so that people can see impact sooner. So many campaigns, big ones, stretch out over 7, 8, 9 years. And donors want to be, especially major donors, want to be involved. And it's no longer just, the campaign committee or the transformational donors who insist on having a level of involvement with your institution and on accountability. Nobody settles for the standard stewardship report much anymore that's mailed out once a year. They really want a regular ongoing relationship with your leadership and with your positions. And that is the kind of energy and involvement that the campaign allows for you. So in summary, I would say again that a campaign remains the single best model for organizing and executing a fundraising initiative. Build on the case for support comments that we heard earlier. Create compelling and gift opportunities, hammer away on mission impact, and then consider a smaller scope limited campaign.
Thank you, Mark. Well, as we all saw, the report really identified an emphasis in major and planned gifts, and we all know that this counts for such a huge proportion of the giving to health and to all organizations. So to talk a little bit about what the report means and some actions you consider, Frank's going to talk about major and planned gifts.
Thank you, David. And I think there was a very good introduction. Mark pointed it out when he first started the webinar that individuals continue to dominate American philanthropy, and in 2016 they were the largest source of funding to healthcare. So I'm going to preach to the choir a little bit, because I doubt that anyone on the webinar is going to dispute the fact that major giving is important. But just to reinforce the point, if you need to think about the specifics a little bit, giving to healthcare has continued to grow dramatically, as you saw in the introductory slides, in spite of all the uncertainty in the healthcare market and marketplace. When you think about how uncertainty usually dampens giving, it doesn't seem to do it in healthcare. It's too important and too personal an issue for people. And so I think that in terms of fundraising, we remain in the sweet spot despite a volatile environment. Major gifts were the largest source of healthcare funds raised in 2016. The AHP study has it at 28%, followed by foundations, annual giving, special events, and planned giving. So again, the emphasis on individuals in the context of those campaigns that Mark was talking about is an absolute necessity. It's no surprise that all of our institutions are looking for increased efficiency and a better return on investment. And so more time cultivating major gift prospects will have ultimately the greatest yield. And a few more indicators in just looking at this area is that fewer American households are giving to charity. One estimate has a decrease in the number of donors nationally, not just the healthcare, but overall, a decrease of 7% in the last 5 years. Now, the interesting thing is that the giving by those who remain is up 42%. So I don't think I've ever seen anything that points to fewer donors giving more. It absolutely points us to individual major gift conversations. The one segment that held steady in terms of the number of donors over the past 5 years has been older, wealthier Americans. And so again, it sounds like a major gift pool, or a good portion of the major gift pool. And I don't want to diminish base building activities, the annual fund, social media. These are important in many aspects, in terms of visibility, in terms of interesting a new generation of people in your cause. But I think the point to take away from this is that as you design your staff and your budget, you should give primary importance to relationship building and solicitation of that top group of prospects. And to touch on planned giving, which is very related, and an important part, a structured gift is an important part of many major gifts. Planned giving's also been in a fascinating place given changes in tax law over the past decades, but the number of taxable estates has actually declined from 2000 to 2013. It dropped from 2% of all estates to 0.2% of all estates. So many fewer estates are being taxed. The interesting thing is the amount given to charity from those estates has stayed steady or even risen slightly. So again, smaller pool, larger gifts. Giving USA really pointed to an interesting fact and encouragement, I think, for planned giving, is that in 2017, giving by bequest from estates of less than $1 million grew by 11%. And so the estate tax doesn't even kick in until about $5.5 million. So the question to ask yourselves internally is, are you paying attention to planned giving, people who are giving to mission and are thinking in the long term? Because there's a great deal of potential for smaller estate gifts. And currently only 5% of all estates leave a charitable bequest. So again, a wide open field there. There's been strong giving to donor advised funds at the end of 2017, partly driven by either changes in tax law or fears of changes in tax law. Now, the interesting thing is going to be the payouts from those donor advised funds are yet to come in the future. So there's an opportunity there for those of you who have donors who use that vehicle. And probably a final point that, if you're not paying attention to planned giving, your competitors are. That 91% of the organizations polled report that they're pursuing planned gifts. So you don't want to be one of the 9% who are not. So that's a lot of information, but I think if I were to give you two takeaways, one is certainly to tilt the balance of your operation toward major gifts. Not that you're ignoring everything else, but you'll leave more money on the table if you ignore that segment. And that it's easy to overlook planned giving in a healthcare environment where there's a lot of pressure to fund current needs. Don't overlook it. I think that's all for this, David.
Thank you, Frank. Mark mentioned that the report had some interesting information. Actually, it's been a pretty good amount of content on peer-to-peer and digital, and we're going to combine that with events as well and talk about strategies going forward. as informed by the report. Mark's going to talk about that. Mark?
Yes, what was very clear in the report is that the organizations that have relied upon what they refer to as the a-thon gifts, so the marathons and the dance-a-thons and those kind of things, are seeing significant decreases in participation and dollars raised from those. Those events for organizations like American Heart Association, those kinds of things, they don't stand alone by themselves well anymore. And they are not close enough to where the money is being utilized for donors and participants to see impact. And so when you combine that with the way that social media technology, has involved a much bigger slice of the population, you come up with a formula that most refer to, as I've had the chance to talk to several successful organizations who are doing this, referred to as peer-to-peer fundraising. So these are the bike rides that get a number of people to sponsor a rider based on the number of miles that they're going. The funds are funding a specific program within an organization, and the individuals who are both the event participants as well as the donors are invited, for an up-close view, either a real up-close view, or the technology is such that they can get that online so that they can understand what the impact is. They also are able to follow progress. Many organizations have gotten agreements from patients or their families that they've worked with to hold up an individual, the family, as examples of care, and the difference that philanthropy can make. And those putting a real face, multiple real faces with where the donor is giving their money allows them to get into a story, and many of those stories are happy, and then occasionally there are sad ones, and there is an emotional engagement that is happening with these that you don't find in the one-off event. And for the purposes of our presentation today, or our discussion, whatever you call it, I'm contrasting these pretty severely because there are certainly strong, good events out there that do involve people. But I think the difference is that the organizations who would be considered in this best practice category, they have looked at what they're doing. They've decided, what their ROI is. They've measured that ROI not only in terms of dollars raised or cost spent, but they've also measured it in terms of how people become really, truly involved in their organization, and how, in terms of, donor retention, how do you keep their involvement? And they've looked carefully at what are they competing with in their particular space. And for, again, most of us, this is a local, regional kind of effort. So looking at what you're currently doing and figuring out if those efforts and that staff and that program dollars can be redirected to something that is either different in the way of a fixer-upper, if you will, or a start-over, I think donors respond positively to that kind of evaluation. Sometimes, as we know, there's so much loyalty to events that in some ways are past their prime, that it's difficult to disconnect from those. But I think taking a very objective view on those will end up with a better decision, and having the right people in the room, including not just your leadership beyond development in the organization and physicians, but also some of these participants themselves, not just the big donors, but the ones that are going to be out there. Because the focus here, whilst you can certainly get big donors for this kind of peer-to-peer fundraising in the form of usually sponsors or underwriters, this is a grassroots kind of undertaking. The piece that brings that home the most is the digital kind of work that that organizations must do, which means that a development office, that's used to doing traditional development activities is usually not used to developing a social media strategy, much less actually hiring people, not just outsourcing it, but looking seriously at bringing somebody in. Because once somebody is on the inside, not only do they have more personal ownership, but they can then work with the larger organization infrastructure, however large that may be. The point is they have to work across the infrastructure, and to be able to do that on a full-time basis has been seen to make the difference. It's a long-term commitment, and that's something that development people, as we talk about things like annual funds, we've always said, and it's always meant getting the buy-in of people knowing that you're going to have to make some investment up front in order for these kind of events to really return something to you over time. And in addition to outreach through digital, it's really looking seriously at how you take something and you integrate it into the messaging of the organization. And again, for some health organizations that have big marketing programs like hospitals, there has to be a place found for this kind of peer-to-peer fundraising so that there's consistency in messaging and an opportunity for people to respond through a call to action that, again, might be going out on behalf of the peer-to-peer fundraising activity that's being done in the name of the organization. So I'll mention a few that some of you may know, but the Jimmy Fund has been a great example of this. Of course, it's had 5 decades to get to where it is. It's run out of Boston. There are a few events like this at Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center. The Hackensack Meridian, and I think there are 2 or 3 people on from that organization with our webinar today, but the Tackle Kids Cancer effort, only 3 years old, but they've done the kinds of things I'm talking about and been absolutely diligent and committed to making it work, and it's making a difference there. So, and my apologies to you all who are on the phone from Hackensack Meridian. I'm sure I didn't do it all justice, but it's this, I think, is a big future. It's a big future for healthcare fundraising overall, but it will be one that not everybody is going to end up doing, because I think that there's a geographical space to be owned here, and if you're going to be one of the first or second ones into the market, you're going to stand a much better chance of being successful than if you're going to be a latecomer to this kind of fundraising. So let me just mention a few actionable ideas here that you might take. One is just realize that this peer-to-peer fundraising is overtaking the time-worn special event. Make a careful assessment of your current special event activities in terms of ROI, impact, competitive factors. Decide on whether you want a fixer-upper or a start-over based on a set of clear objectives and criteria. And then really hyper-focus on the critical success factors for a grassroots and integrated peer-to-peer initiative. And look at staffing, startup investments, how the leaders are engaged, how does it fit with the institutional marketing, being sure it's integrated. Has to be digitally interactive and have a social media component, and then give yourself a long-term return.
Thank you, Mark. So for our last topic, we're going to talk about grateful giving. Frank, we're just a little behind. We want to save some time for some questions that we received. But Frank's had some great experience in this on both sides of the desk. So Frank, share with us some thoughts.
Thank you. I will do so quickly, David, but thank you. We all know that the best source of individual major gift prospects for health-related causes is patients, their families, and friends connected with them. And we avoid calling it grateful patient giving because oftentimes the donors aren't the patients, and oftentimes the outcome wasn't good. So gratitude isn't necessarily the motivation, but rather helping someone avoid what they've seen. But how do we smartly look at this population to solve two issues that we have? So there's a two-pronged approach, I think, to patient and family giving that we all should be thinking about. The first is really, how can you use new tools that are coming on the market or have come on the market to analyze data, do predictive modeling and analytics of your patient population to say, here's the group that's most likely to become future donors, and single them out for more individualized attention. And there's many factors that can go into that. Our analytics people at Marts&Lundy do that. There are other companies that do that as well. But that's one way to look at shoring up that base, the declining number of donors. But organizations that have a patient base have a real opportunity to expand that. So take advantage of those analytic tools. And I think on the other end, at the top of the pyramid, how do you best engage your major gift prospects in a way that's meaningful to them, and how do you identify them? And what we found, and again, this was some of my experience in my pre-consulting life, but also experience that I've gotten through clients that I've worked with since then, is that building a strong partnership between your providers, your physicians, your nurses, other healthcare professionals, and your advancement officers winds up being a very critical element. Can they partner together? Do they work together? There's a big educational component for care providers about why this is important, why it's ethical, how we go about it. But building that sort of, and there's a system and data component as well. But to build a program that's focused on increasing referrals from physicians, from nurses, to advancement, and then sometimes involving those professionals as much as they're comfortable in cultivation and rarely in solicitation, that will be the most effective contact we have with major gift prospects coming out of a health environment. And so I would just say that, so the takeaway is, I think, pretty simple, is that it doesn't happen by accident. At the low end, pay attention, use those data analytics to broaden your pool. And at the high end, over time, building a culture of philanthropy can happen as advancement partners well, helps educate, and works closely with care providers.
Thank you, Frank. And thank you for those of you who submitted questions. This first question, I think, gets directly to what we were just talking about, or at least it's part of the conversation. The question is, with mental health and addiction as a priority, it's challenging for hospital systems to receive patient information because it's blocked via regulations through the state and beyond. How are organizations getting around this? I think I'll just start off with this one, Mark and Frank, and then if you pipe in, we've got two others I'd like to get to. But HIPAA compliance is not consistent throughout the country. It's been our experience. We have some that are much more stringent than others, but I would suggest that in a mental health and addiction environment, it's probably going to be as strict as you can get. And there's no easy solution to that, but my first reaction to that is to get as close as you can to your care providers, and just as Frank described, make sure that we're talking with them about philanthropy and how they can be partners with us in generating relationships, and then also with the board. And then finally, there's going to be probably a challenge to find donors who are interested in mental health, addiction, and that are not necessarily affected by it in the family, but believe in it as being critically important for the health of a community. Frank and Mark?
David, this is Frank. I would just like to add that, and I know we don't have much time here, but I'm happy to have a little bit of an offline conversation about that because I'm currently working with one hospital, a mental health hospital, that I think is doing a very good job of this and has built, I think, the internal relationships and maybe working in a state where they can access enough information. What you do with that information and how you contact patients is also critically important in that environment.
Yeah, it's Mark. I would just say, again, it's the culture of the organization that will make the difference in being able to get access.
Okay, thank you. Next question was, improving level of donor retention would seem to be one of the biggest opportunities, and are we in agreement with that? I'll say yes, absolutely, I'm in agreement, as confirmed in part by the Giving USA report. Mark, any thoughts on that?
Oh, absolutely. That would be one of the big opportunities. And I think there's no data that I've been able to secure related to the peer-to-peer, but that is how they build on from year to year. They get the same participants and the same people, who are doing the sponsoring, and get them to do a little more of this and a little more of that. And retention is one of the things that is a success factor for them.
I would add that I have. I'm sorry, Frank, go ahead.
I was just going to say, David, that I would add quickly that I'd also pay special attention to first-time donors. A little more emphasis on the impact that they're having with their giving, because once you get them past that first year, retention rates really begin to come up.
Yeah, the thought I would share is that the closer to the beneficiary of a donor's giving, the closer you can make that connection, the better. And we hear so many times that patient stories matter a lot. Here's one thought that I share as often as I can. It's a simple thing to do, particularly those of you who are in smaller shops, or those of you who are in big shops and you're just flat out busy, which we know is true. And that is to get in the habit of meeting with a physician or two once per month, bring them a note card, ask them to write essentially these words on the note card. I thought of you today when I provided care to this patient, and was reminded again how grateful we are for the support that you give to save and improve lives. Have that physician sign it and send it to a donor. We have a tendency to think of remembering birthdays, donor recognition systems, sending larger reports, newsletters, and so forth, all of which are good, but that personal connection, physician connecting a donor with a patient and a patient story, I think is a big factor in increasing retention. Okay, and then the last question we have time for today is how do you get access to the patient following family information following a visit on a broader scale? Is it solely based on referrals? What about annual giving? What about from an annual giving perspective more? What about from an annual giving perspective? Mark, why don't you talk a little bit about that?
So if I'm following the question here, we know who our patients are at healthcare, at healthcare organizations, and slotting them into some kind of annual giving program that is closest to what you know to be or believe their interest to be, I think is a first step toward that. So some of us do have giving areas around cancer, around the neurosciences. Those are always the best ways to start. And again, that is information that if you know according to HIPAA, you know who the patients are, when they were there, and who their doctor is, that ought to be able to move you in the direction of how to make that kind of targeted annual appeal.
Frank. I would just add that we focused today mostly on talking about major giving from patients and families, but I think a solid annual giving program, mailings, emailings, is another way to identify interest and build a base. As well as using Press Ganey scores, if you can get access to them, for patients who are very satisfied with their experience or their provider. So absolutely, the program should be multifaceted, not simply referrals.
Thank you. Well, this closes out our webinar for today. I just want to thank everyone for participating. Thank you for those who submitted these great questions. We hope we've been able to provide you with some information that you can that's actionable for you in some fashion. We wish you the very, very best in your important work, and look forward to seeing you sometime soon. Take care.